What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we're going to be checking out the Transformers Studio Series Gamer Edition War for Cybertron Deluxe Class Decepticon Soldier, the line's first army builder to be released in a very long time, and surprisingly, despite being based off Barricade, a pretty decent looking figure. So as we check out the details, the original Battlestar Galactica Cylon vibes are most definitely real, especially when it comes down to that face piece. Now, despite being specifically inspired by the video games, I think the design is so great that it could almost perfectly fit in with both the Bumblebee movie and even Transformers 1 characters. As we spin down here to the rest of the robot mode, not only has this guy been really well detailed, but surprisingly almost completely resculpted. I think easily one of the biggest improvements he has in comparison to the original version would be that he is no longer sporting those ridiculously oversized clown feet. Although I will be honest and say, guys, I can't say that I'm crazy as we spin here to the inside profile. Considering that there are figures such as the Last Night Hot Rod which do exist at the same price point as this guy, honestly I do think this looks kind of rough. In the video games, these designs were definitely incredibly clean. I don't believe they really integrated any of the vehicle mode into their robot mode, so unfortunately he does come across as being a little kibbly. But with that being said, isn't anywhere near as cluttered in comparison to Barricade. So overall, guys, between the two, I definitely do think he is the superior mold, despite still being far from perfect. For a background character that did pretty much get obliterated by Megatron the second that he had a speaking role, surprisingly he hasn't turned out anywhere near as bad as I was expecting. Now, turning to firepower, we do see the return of the Neutron Assault Rifle. Originally, I was a little hacked off not to see the inclusion of a brand new weapon, especially as we do go through so many of them in the video game. Although, I do believe these were the soldiers' primary weaponry, so I guess to be honest, I really can't complain too much. And when it does come down to integration, much like the previous Gamer Edition figures, it does look seamless. In the video game, the forearm would transform into the blaster, so that honestly is looking kinda sick. Turning to posability, despite apparently being a generic background soldier, the head sculpt is actually incredibly expressive. So in addition to looking up as well as looking down, it can also tilt both side to side and turn left to right. The shoulders have no issues in kicking forwards, in kicking backwards, although unfortunately the outwards range is severely limited. The elbow can bend to 90, the bicep can swivel, the wrist can spin all the way around, and surprisingly the same can also be said as we check out the waist joint. Now, considering that this guy is nowhere near as cluttered in comparison to Barricade, the hips have no issues in kicking forwards to that far as well as back to that far. So when it does come down to putting the splits on the battlefield, these guys should have no issues at all. Although unfortunately the outwards range, much like the shoulders, is incredibly restricted. The thigh can spin all the way around and the knee bend is definitely decent. Although I will say, guys, this is definitely where I do have some issues with the kibble. So if you do not take a hold of the wheel and begin to hinge this here backwards, unfortunately this is really just going to stay in place. So when you are manipulating this, I would definitely recommend to taking a hold of that as well. And then when it comes down to the ankle joints, unfortunately he is lacking the now standard ankle rocker and instead can merely pivot forwards due to this guy's transformation. But as I'm sure you guys will know by now, to see what this soldier is truly packing, now let's put him through the pose test. Turning to some size comparisons, we are starting off with arguably the most important out of the bunch, the War for Cybertron Barricade, who I do regard as being easily one of the weakest entries into the Gamer Edition subline, so was honestly surprised to see it make for such a great Decepticon soldier. Visually, I think this guy looks so much better in comparison, and he is actually way more than meets the eye, because they have resculpted a lot. With the exception of the transformation, the skirt armor, the hip joints and the wrists, this guy is actually completely brand new, and to be honest, I think he looks all the better for it. And despite me not being a big fan of the panels on the back, they actually serve a purpose this time round. Gone are the stability issues that we saw originally with Barricade, so to my surprise, despite him only being a background character, he is surprisingly better than what is considered to be a top tier Decepticon. Next up we have the Deluxe class Sideswipe, and surely I can't be the only one that thinks the quality is slowly but surely improving, especially with the upcoming release of the Voyager class Ratchet. Here he is compared alongside the Gamer Edition Bumblebee, the Voyager class Starscream, who despite packing an overly large cockpit, I actually think was a great turning point for this subline. War for Cybertron Megatron, who savagely executed this guy. And then finally, the pretty awesome Optimus Prime. Now, turning to this guy's transformation, despite definitely taking inspiration from Barricade, he is also surprisingly packing quite a few of his own tricks. So for the first step, take a hold of the wrist and spin this around, just like that. We can then proceed to disconnect the forearms directly down the middle. You are then going to take the wrist and slide this here inside, and then proceed to combine these here back together. Again guys, now let's make sure to do the same for the opposite side. So spin around here at the wrist joint, pop open the forearm, and spin the wrist all the way inside, and then once again connect these panels back together. Then for the next step, we can spin down here to the base of the figure, where we are going to take the front part of the foot and snap this here into the shin, exactly like that. Again, now let's make sure to do the same for the opposite side. With that now complete, we can then take a hold of the waist joint and spin this all the way around until eventually the back is now facing the front. With that then complete, what you are now going to do is begin to line these panels up just like that. Once that's complete, we can now take a hold of the windshield and begin to raise this here upwards, just like this. Then for the next step, we are now going to spin around here to this side. We are now going to take what will become the wheels, we are going to pry these here outwards, and then we are going to spin these here all the way around exactly like that. We can then spin back around here to the front, where we are going to connect the wheel to the front end of the vehicle mode. Again guys, now let's make sure to do the same for the opposite side. So pry this section here outwards, which will then allow for enough clearance for this to then flip all the way around. We can then connect that there into place just like that. Then what you are going to do is spin around here to the backpack. We are going to disconnect this exactly like that, and then we are going to completely extend this joint here open. What I would then recommend to do would be to just leave it resting here for now like this. Then we are going to spin here to the back. Now you are going to make use out of the shoulder joints. You are going to compress these here downwards. Now there are 2 points of connection that you are definitely going to want to take note of. One of those would be this tab, which is then going to slide into that slot, and the second one would be this one, which is going to attach into that tab. So what you're going to do is slide this here down. We are first of all going to bring this here in at an angle, attach that into place, and then hopefully this one here will very nicely connect into place. Again guys, now let's make sure to do the same for the opposite side. So drop this here down, again at a slight angle, make sure that that connects, and then slide that there into the outside part of the thigh. What we can then do is flip this guy here upwards, where we are now going to take the windshield, we are going to push this here backwards until this very nicely snaps into place. And then for one final step, we are now going to spin around here to the backpack, where these tabs are going to slide into those slots. So bring this here up and over, snap all of this here into place, and there is the Decepticon soldier, now fully transformed. Racing through the battlefield of Cybertron and trying not to get himself obliterated, here we have the soldier now fully transformed into his vehicle mode, and this guy is looking solid. I definitely think when it comes down to these War for Cybertron figures that their alt modes have almost been the strong point of the subline, and this guy absolutely continues on that trend. When it does come down to detail, he is looking sharp, surprisingly sculpted even when it comes down here to the back. The only issue which I really take with him would be the colour scheme. Instead of inspiring him more so off the concept art, they've instead based this off the actual CG design, which in the game looks decent considering that it is incredibly darkly lit, but when it does come down to an action figure, I really don't think that the grey looks all that great. Had this guy maybe been primarily cast in black and purple, personally I think that would have looked so much better. But to be fair guys, still really nicely detailed, and I think easily one of the biggest geek out parts of the transformation would be how the forearms pretty much seamlessly integrate into this guy's vehicle form. Unlike the Transformers 1 version, they really don't stick out like a sore thumb, and even as we spin this guy here to the underside, the compression is absolutely real. This guy is stacked. I also think the details from the front are mostly looking sharp, and despite him sporting these not so good looking clip-on wheels, surprisingly he has no issues in burning energon whilst cruising through Cybertron. So yet again guys, despite only being based on a mid-mold at best, I think alongside his robot mode, this has actually turned out so much better than I was expecting. Now, as this is the War for Cybertron and the goal of the game is to blow each other into bits, I think the weapon integration is looking sick. This guy can totally sport a full-blown pop-out blaster, so should have no issues in blasting his opponents into smithereens. Sliding our way through some vehicle mode size comparisons, first up we are bringing out the Gamer Edition Barricade. Now initially I expected these two to be very similar when it came down to design. I couldn't be any further from the truth, because they are in fact sporting two entirely different looks. Even the wheels are completely brand new. I think when it does come down to this latest wave of Studio Series, it may end up being that the Decepticon Soldier is sporting even more new parts in comparison to the actual leader class Springer. Next up we have the Gamer Edition Sideswipe, and yet again guys, the Soldier appears to be an absolute beast in comparison, despite these both being deluxes. And you can see that even more as we do bring out the Gamer Edition Bumblebee. I mean damn, check out the size difference between these two. This guy is an absolute unit, to the point where if you don't count Megatron's Fusion Cannon, they are pretty much exactly the same size. Then last but by no means least, we are bringing out the War for Cybertron Optimus Prime, so yet again absolutely bringing the heat when it does come down to size. So, wrapping up on this review for the Transformers Studio Series War for Cybertron Decepticon Soldier. Considering that this guy did originally come from that mid at best Barricade, I actually think the design team did a banging job. Now granted, this guy is still far from being perfect. I do think he is still a little kibbly when it does come down to robot mode, but to kind of go back to my earlier point, that is more of an issue with the design itself, considering that in the video game, these guys are incredibly clean. Even the vehicle mode has been completely resculpted front side to back, and it results in yet another banger design. So overall, despite this guy still being far from perfect, I do think when it comes down to an army builder and specifically a Gamer Edition release, he's actually pretty decent. I would love to get your guys' thoughts on this Decepticon Soldier down in the comment section below. What do you guys think? I want to thank you all so much for watching, and until my next video, transform and roll out!